spectrum of qualitative research from right to left, if you like. I think it makes sense like from right to left, and then you can decide which resonates with you the most and pick and choose, like a buffet, what you want me to come back and talk about. If you want to do research development based on those methods, that's fine. I'm really keen to support what you're doing because I'm asking these guys to support me what I'm doing. So they come in to help me teach and other things. So it's a barter system, right? So yeah, I'm in the clinical psychology unit at Sydney Uni, and I'm the only real qualitative researcher there. And my interests are varied. There used to be anorexia nervosa and narrative inquiry, and now it's moving much more towards issues of cultural diversity, decolonizing clinical psychology, refugee work and indigenous work, things like that. So I'm trying to make quite a shift, if you can imagine that's quite a shift from those two topics. So what I'll do is I'm going to go through qualitative methods, the full spectrum, about 12 of them, in 40 minutes. And I'll give you an example from my own work and from my colleagues' work of each of those methods. And then at the end you can ask questions about that, and I think hopefully then you'll get a snapshot of the whole qualitative inquiry, within the next 40 minutes. So and we will have time for questions. Just talk to me if you want to as we go, and I'll stop and ask if it makes sense. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we have quantitative research, statistically based, numbers based research over here, and then at this end over here we've got like critical feminist discourse analysis, like over here, right? So I want to fill in the gaps between the two of them. Like how do you get from here to here? How do you get from traditional research to really radical? I mean, you can even go further radical, and I'll talk about post-qualitative research, and that goes even further at the avant-garde of research. There's a whole school of that as well. It's very interesting. So I'll take you on that journey. If you're a quant researcher and you want to do qual, probably the first thing you do would maybe a content analysis, right? So a content analysis would be you interview people and you want to know how many times do they mention a diagnosis, or you want to look at newspapers and say how many times does it say turn back the votes, and you count it. So it's still quant, but it's using text. Does that make sense? So you're counting how many times something comes up in text. So it's text-based, but it's not qual in the sense that you're looking at numbers. A lot of market research, that kind of stuff as well. So a lot of people who are doing quant research would probably be very comfortable doing that. Content analysis, counting stuff. There are 186 mentions of this year, stuff like that. It's fairly limited, it's certainly superficial, but it can have its place at times, and you want to make a point. So if you move another step further, we abandon numbers. So after this, we abandon numbers forever. And there's no turning back, and we enter into meaning and words and the interpretation of meaning. But the first couple of methods are descriptive methods, not interpretative methods. This is a very important thing to understand. The more traditional, more conservative qual research may interview people or observe people or interview groups and basically analyze what they say and describe it. That's it. This is what they said, and I've done a thematic analysis. I've got all the top 10 things. Like, what are the top 10 things that people say about living with one leg? If you did that as a research project, you have the top 10 experiences. It's descriptive, right? There's no interpretation. It's not theorized. You're not applying any theory. You just describe. And that's kind of the most basic qual research, thematic analysis. Yes, so you've got interviews, 20 pages of interviews times 20, and you have to go through it and look for themes and look at what people are saying. And that's kind of the starting point. How to do thematic analysis, how to code things, how to try and get the top 10 things that people say. Again, it's valid, The starting point for a student would be that. If you're a new student, an honors student maybe, and you want to do qual, you're probably going to do thematic analysis and learn to interview people properly, and learn to do coding properly, and have someone else code with you so that you can test the reliability of the coding and focus on rigor, and still be in the quant realm philosophically. Does that make sense? You're still about truth, right? What is the truth? We need to know it. There is a truth. That's even more outrageous for a qual researcher that there is one. And you would still be assuming that the researcher can actually do that. Can a researcher interview people and say, this is what I found? For people who go beyond thematic analysis, we say that's impossible. It's impossible. Objectivity is impossible. So we enter now into the murky world of qual where objectivity is abandoned. That's a frightening concept for a quant researcher, right? Where we say objectivity, who needs that? Like, what? What? Hello? So, now this very important issue in qual, that when you're doing a quant research, your measures are, the reliability and validity of your measures give you you feel like you have objectivity because of those measures, right? To a degree. And what you're studying is what you're finding. But what is the measure in a qual research? What is the measure? What is the tool? We don't use measures, so what's the tool? What's the data collection tool?
The researcher. The
researcher, me and you, and so we enter into the world of subjectivity, don't we? And intersubjectivity. In other words, I'm a human being, and I'm interviewing people with lived experience of psychosis, and I meet with them intersubjectively. You know, me and you meet, and we make meaning about your experience. The objectivity becomes spurious, doesn't it? It becomes impossible. I won't talk about how you manage it, but this is critical, that now you're entering the paradigm of qual, which is we're interested in subjectivity. We're not interested in objectivity. No, we're interested in subjectivity and depth. So we sacrifice breadth for depth. We don't see 100 people. We don't have power. We might interview 10 or 20 people until we run out of themes, saturation. But we're interested in depth and subjectivity. We're interested, not everybody, some of the models of qual are interested in interiority. Yes? Yeah. Interiority. It's what was originally psychology was interested in. You know, Wundt and introspection. Originally, the researchers looked inward on themselves. But we don't do that. One method does, but we were interested in subjectivity and interiority. And interiority cannot be captured with the DAS, you know. It can't be captured with a scale. It can only be captured in relationship. And it's in relationship that certain things can be discovered, but not truths. Things that ring true can be discovered, but not truths. Does that make sense? Realness can be discovered, but not reality. So we enter now into a whole other sphere of what research can mean. What are the meaningfulness of qualitative research? So, we've done content analysis and thematic analysis. There's more. Grounded theory. Have anybody heard of grounded theory? Mm-hmm. So, grounded theory, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, it was changed and modified, improved. But grounded theory, if thematic analysis gives you the top 10 things, what's it like to live with one leg? Grounded theory gives you a model. It's about model development, sophistication. So you can say, well, what's it like to live one leg, and how does that compare if you live in Sydney versus New York, and what's it like to be a woman versus a man, you know, and what happens if it's amputated at a different spot, and how does that all compare? And then you get a theory that looks at all the themes and the higher order themes and the relationship between those themes and the demographics. Yeah? So you're getting a nice theory development exercise. Yeah? So you're growing a tree as you analyze the things. You grow this tree, you know, this theory, and that's getting more sophisticated. But the problem with it is the original grounded theory people believed that it was grounded in the data. In other words, that there was no researcher, you interviewed people, you did your analysis, and out came this tree, and it represented the lived experience of the people you interviewed. Yes, so, again, the researcher was a was blank, you know, was a blank slate. That's not possible in relationships to be blank. You know, you can't go and interview people and keep all of your values and biases and views out. You can't say, well, there's no relationship here, I'm just going to ask questions and pretend I'm not here. It doesn't work like that. A good interviews don't work like that. Good interviews involve relationship. They're close to therapy, you know. They're therapy without the intervention. It's like being a grandparent where you can play with people and give them back, you know. You don't have to do that. So you get to ask all the questions and be curious, but you don't have to fix anything. It's fantastic. If you're a therapist, I'm a therapist, so I just think it's incredible because being a therapist is really hard work. So yeah. So grounded theory was then changed and modified by Shamaz and other people to incorporate this issue, which I'll talk about in a bit. So can you start to see some of the difficulties with some of the epistemological differences between quant and qual? In other words, some of the different views on what's true and what's not. Some of the core issues with qual that you have to grapple with are philosophical. And psychology has always been basically applied philosophy. That's what it is, right? Always has been, always will. Every model of therapy has its roots in philosophy, and that's what, if we don't, my argument is we need to know philosophy if we're going to be psychologists, because that's where it comes from. And I think it's sad that we don't teach it. Yes? Good.
Well, this question's going to come up eventually.
Great, let's do it then.
Heard it a million times.
Bring it up.
I mean, okay, so you don't, I'm okay with, you know, tossing aside the truth criteria. But, you know, if there's two people generating a theory on the same data, it seems like you need some criteria to decide whose view is better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the second one is pragmatic. Like, what you do through your work, which is totally qualitative, doesn't necessarily make any assumption about truth. But you could have a utility criteria,
yes.
Practical criteria.
Yes, very good.
Is that one? I mean,
oh,
I'm just
yes.
trying to understand how would you separate.
Very good. Now, this is a really great question. There are criteria to establish. Now, one is quality, because there's some really bad qualitative research. You know, really bad, like embarrassingly bad around that, which is not rigorous. And we'll talk about the different types of rigor. So one is quality, and I get my students, all my PhD students, they have to go and do a qualitative meta-synthesis of the research before they help work. They have to read everything and do a proper published meta-synthesis because I don't want them doing any crap. You know? So, and the problem with qual, if we're going to stand tall in research, we're going to have to be equally sophisticated and of equal quality to quant, right? So I very believe that.
There's be a criterion external to.
Yeah, and there are like 5 or 6 different types, you know, depending on what research you're doing and it's well established. But praxis is another one, right? You know, like, are you doing any good?
Yeah.
Are you doing any good? Is it helping anyone? Are you disseminating it beyond the paywall? You know, like, we all need to be held to account on that one. I mean, I think we all should be ashamed of that one. I mean, included that actually we do all this work and put it on our CV, but you know, who's it for? You know?
Yeah.
And the other one is, are we including people with lived experience in our research in a participatory sense? Are we working with them, not on them, right? So that ethical, there's an ethical issue that kind of improve quality. So there are a lot of, there are a different set of criteria perhaps, but they're very strong. And so it's not like we just, but the issue of what's true and what's not, well that one is, so I'll answer that as well. There are 2 ways to answer the question, to deal with the question of reliability and validity. One is to say, we're going to try and have rigor, and we're going to try and be as true and objective as we can. So we're going to have multiple coders. Yes, we're going to have 3 or 4 coders from different point of views, and we're going to compare and contrast.
Yeah.
When we finish doing the analysis, we're going to take it back to the participants, and we're going to check it again to see if we got it right. In fact, let's get new participants, and that gives you rigor. That's one view. Now, the other view is to say, nah, that's rubbish, you can't do that, you're never going to get it. It's better to fully lean into your biases, to put them on the table in your method section, and to write it. I am a white, privileged academic who...
I'll do that in my next method section.
I am. Well, I write that in my method section. I write my sexuality, and I write, you know, it's all there, right? Because and I write down my history and what the research I've done and the philosophies I'm interested in, and it's up front to say, so welcome to my biases, you know, like, and that is transparency, and I think probably quant researchers can be judged for not doing that, you know, like, but, you know, so I think, you know, our weaknesses are your strengths, and your strengths are our weaknesses, you know, and no one wins, so. You know, I think there are ways to deal with this question. I mean, there's a whole literature on it. Yeah. So it's a good question. So, what comes after grounded theory? Phenomenology. Phenomenological research is about, you know, the word lived experience comes from phenomenology and Heidegger and Hegel and all those old philosophers, but phenomenology is saying, so there's a woman called Ruth Ellen Josselson who is my friend, and she wrote this statement. She said, good research is when you can listen in on the dialogue that a person is having with themselves. Now I find that incredibly powerful criteria on which to set interviews. That if you can listen in on the meaning making of that person, and then try and make meaning of that meaning making, a double hermeneutic, if you know, a double interpretation, that's good quality. And so how do you do that? How do you interview someone and listen in? What kind of an interviewer would you have to be to get to that point when you're interviewing someone? What do you think? Like,
you have to have a relationship with the person.
Yes.
You have to be engaged with them in some way.
You do. And then empathy becomes your research tool. And I find that an incredibly revolutionary idea, that your empathy and your capacity for empathy is your tool, and it's liberating to be given permission to use it, you know, as a researcher. And then you can access hidden things, you know, you know, that become a knowledge, important forms of knowledge, you know, and things that quant can't get to. They will never get to. So.
Oh, I think that's very interesting and very relevant, because it's often, I suspect, the thing that is used to discredit some qualitative research.
Oh yes, yeah. You mean the fact that we're soft and...
Well, that you know, people talk about empathy and having a relationship with the people they're interviewing.
Yes, I've been accused of everything under the... It's just tea and biscuits. Why don't you write novels? I mean, like all sorts of insults.
Why don't you do something more scientific?
Yeah. I mean, I don't care about that anymore. I used to. I think, you know, screw you, that's my answer. But because I understand it now, you know, after many years, I kind of understand the beauty of it, and that it is a form of knowledge production that's different, you know, and it's liberatory for both people. I mean, it's a very meaningful process for both parties. So
I'll stop talking. We start to use very emotive language when we talk about research in this way. Yes. And again, that's the shaky. Well, this resonates with me. Good. This resonates with what I'm doing. Good. Yeah.
One of the big schools of qualitative research that ties in with this is narrative inquiry. And narrative inquiry is very strong. And narrative inquiry is saying people's stories are a form of evidence. People's stories are a form of evidence, and they're culturally very important, because why don't we have research methods that are culturally valid? Why don't we have cultural validity? Why is it always empirical validity? Maybe we should pick research methods that are culturally resonate with the people that we're interviewing, you know, like cultural validity. So that all sorts of validity, like we can accuse quants of doing non-valid things, and they can accuse us, but then we have a war, you know, and it's stupid, you know. Like that kind of war is just ridiculous, because they're it's like saying, it's like an apple and an orange having an argument, you know, over you're not an orange, you're not an apple, like it's crazy, you know, because they're different ways of seeing the world and different ways of making meaning. So there should be no, winner, you know, there's no winner. There's lots of losers, and usually qual people are the losers, by the way. You're going to have a pretty thick skin. But that's pretty sad, I think, that is the way things work. that the qual people lose. We lose on funding and we lose on all sorts, but we are strong in solidarity with each other. You know, we buy. So, as a group, so narrative inquiry. Narrative inquiry is a very beautiful method, and there's a great guy called Arthur Frank who's one of the kind of big dudes in narrative inquiry, and he, you know, you can interview like 20, 30 people. So I did a project with a student where we wanted to know, how do people recover from anorexia nervosa when they've been sick for more than 20 years? Are there anybody? Is it possible to recover from that level of chronic anorexia nervosa? And so we went around the country on the radio and interviewed, and we only found 8 people. And these 8 people were all in their 60s. And we interviewed them, and we got their whole life story. It was really amazing. And we discovered things about recovery from chronic anorexia nervosa that was never been in the textbook, because it was hidden inside the knowledge. Not outside, not expert knowledge, but inside the knowledge. And narrative inquiry allows you to find out inside the knowledge. Knowledge out there on the street, you know, of how people really deal with recovery. It's got nothing to do with all the crap we say, you know, like, it's got nothing to do with models of therapy. Like, people recover for much more life and death reasons, you know, they recover. We're tiny little people in our lives, you know, and they have, their stories are very moving and horrific, and you know, and we should be humble and listen to what's going on when it comes to recovery from severe mental health problems, from very severe mental health. So now you can add to narrative inquiry arts-based narrative inquiry. Arts-based narrative inquiry. So we can bring art and qual together in some very powerful ways. So let me try and give you an example. So my student Jennifer is in her 60s, new PhD student, the best type of PhD student, because she's, you know, she's wearing, what did she say? I'm wearing big girls' pants. So she gets on and does it on her own, but she's really great. She is looking at women who have been sexually abused when they were young, developed anorexia nervosa, and then have recovered. So she's looking at the history of a person's relationship with their body from childhood. She's looking at embodied self across childhood, across life. And she's looking at it from a feminist lens only. So this is now we become theory-driven qualitative research. This is what the quant people really hate. We're using this theory and we're applying it to these stories. Can you see you can see the arguments that would happen already? But her research is amazing because she's found a method that enables her to study somatic bodily processes, somatic, how the body is it is a person's identity. You know, we're not like I have a body, but I am a body. You understand the difference? Merleau-Ponty is a great philosopher who talks about the mind-body, not mind-body relationship, but actually they're all one. The duality is, of course, created by us. So what she's doing is narrative inquiry augmented by body mapping. Now, body mapping is developed by Catherine Boydell, a black dog, and it basically involves lying down on a big piece of canvas, and you have a picture drawn around your body, and inside that there's a really long method for encouraging a person to paint and draw and inscript their story into that figure. And they're very beautiful, confronting kind of pictures. And then from that picture, as they're doing it, they tell the researcher their story. And it's a story of their relationship with their body. And so that's body mapping and narrative inquiry. And so that's getting to more sophisticated types of qual research that can access things like a person's relationship with their body that can't be accessed in other ways. So photo-elicited narrative inquiry is another one. You know, there's all sorts. Photo elicitation is really interesting. There's all sorts of engagements between qual and art. I'm going to the con to see what we can do with music in qual. Is it possible to use music as a way to, as a form of data? You know? And I write poetry myself, and I publish it, and that's my interest. And I see poetry as a form of access to knowledge. It's an introspective tool as a form of knowledge of research, because you're looking internally, introspectively at yourself, and you're a barometer of your environment. So it's a way of accessing your environment. Does that make sense? We're getting into the more, we're moving on the spectrum a little bit more. It comes to the point at which you say, well, what's art and what's research? But anyway, so I just want to show you the full spectrum. So, any questions or thoughts? I'll take a break from that. Yes? Oh, yes, hi. Hello.
What are your views on mixed methods research that somehow marry between quantitative and qualitative perspectives?
What do you think? Is it possible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Mixed methods. What are my views on it?
Well, I think I should probably ask, because you set it up as two really opposing views.
Yeah.
One
I created a
view
binary. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
You sort of set up this expectation of a binary universe, and I don't see it that way. But is it possible to ask a research question, but then try to answer it using the tools of quantitative research and qualitative research?
Yes. Of course, you destroyed my punchline at the end, where I say everything I said was rubbish. But yeah, but of course they're the same. One is they're different views on the same thing. One is the outside view, and the other is the inside view. So the outside and the inside, if you can marry them, then that's fascinating. If they're different, that's even more interesting. Like if you say we did all this research and we found this when we studied refugees and their experience of trauma, we did quant research, but then we did qual research and it was different. What? Like, that becomes fascinating. You know? But if it's the same, it becomes a validity. We will call that triangulation. Two methods finding a similar thing, it becomes rock solid, right? You know, I mean, so it's really useful. And I don't think any of these methods should be excluded from being included in a mixed method. But the challenge is, and I've tried to bring, for example, narrative researchers and randomized controlled trial researchers together, and it was like couples therapy that went wrong. Right? They hated each other. They couldn't agree. The narrative people said, "Oh, you're using measures." No, we don't agree with that. That's oppressive. You know, the DAS. Oh, that's hegemonic. You know, masculinity. You know, and all I was like, oh fuck. And then the quad people are like, oh, you know, like it was a war. So. The problem is that people don't have the philosophical literacy to hold things in tension and to say, let's have two paradigms sitting together and see what happens creatively, right? Because actually, like interdisciplinary work, you create something beautiful when you clash two things together, but I think it's pretty rare that people can handle it, you know? Yes, so it's a really good question, yes.
I wanted to take question with your rock-solid solidarity of the qualitative people. I had an experience where I was working with the organizer, Exfree, and they were saying, who should we get to do the qualitative courses? And I named some suggestions, and they said, well, they had done them in the past, but they aren't available. So they went around to a lot of qualitative researchers, and basically what they got was that I can do this, and nobody else can do this, but I'm not available to do it. They got this from, lots and lots. They got this from several different qualitative researchers. So this solidarity and so forth. I would suggest that
it's not the case.
The angst between qualitative and quantitative researchers is probably minor.
No, actually, no, let's talk about that. That's really fascinating. The politics of qual and the politics of evidence within qual can be brutal, you know. And so the new posthumanists, the new method, posthumanism, they're like the cool people, you know, like when you go to a conference, they're the cool people and everybody else is uncool, you know, and that goes on. And then everybody wants to be like them. It's like high school, you know, it's the same cliques and everything. When I'm speaking about solidarity, I'm speaking about my own network, my own community, you know, of people who surround me and I surround them. And we, at Sydney Uni and other unions, that's what we do. And I think we do that well, but yeah, on an international level, it's just as bad.
But this isn't even international. This is actually Australia.
Oh, fine. I apologize. Please forgive us.
Yeah.
But you know, it's human beings, right?
Yeah, it's not an issue of forgiveness. It's an issue of the picture that you're painting, the us versus them.
Yeah.
Yeah. The us that you're painting isn't nearly as uniform as you're suggesting.
I mean,
and the us versus them isn't as extreme as you're painting as well.
No,
and I agree with what Belgium
I know.
said. But it's a good story.
Yeah, it's a good story. I'm trying to tell a story. But I mean, you know, a lot of Qual tries to break down binaries, and I guess I've got to be careful. I'm going to break them down at the end, but you know, binaries are our enemy. I mean, they're our enemy in society. They're our enemy through, you know, the amplification of social media. They're our enemy in politics. So why perpetuate them in Qual? I agree.
Paul,
Yeah.
because you know there's a pressure to publish in highly ranked journals.
Yeah.
How does Qual stand up in the highest ranked psychology journals?
Oh God. Not well.
Thank you.
The Nature and the Lancet all come out with the roll out their articles to say we accept qualitative, and you know, and it's really great, but then that's not how it works. So for example, I used to work a lot in eating disorders. The International Journal of Eating Disorders, the top journal, won't accept any papers like that. Whereas the European Journal, which is the second rung, will, and then you know the Journal of Eating Disorders, which is the bottom rung, always does. You know, but so yeah, we do live in the margins to some degree. You know, I mean it's very hard, and I think this maybe that's what you're picking up. This is where we do feel a bit aggrieved, you know, about it. You know, so I have to reflect on my own thoughts about that and my own, you know, tendency to polarize for that reason. It's hard.
Yeah, we're going to comment a little bit on that. So Belgica and I do a bit of co-supervision together, and we have our students read Indigenous Statistics. It's a fantastic book, and a lot of the points that is made in that book, the quantitative research is the same as the points that you're making in relation to, you know, the epistemology and you know, what's behind the data, who creates it. So
that's fascinating.
I don't really see that much of, you know, and I know my own quant research will swing within your left-right.
Oh, really?
You know, I mean, so if I'm doing machine learning stuff, that's essentially grounded theory. Sometimes the research I do is quantitative advocacy.
Wow.
And then sometimes it's way on the right. So I just wonder whether...
Oh, that's very intriguing. That's very cool.
I mean, I've been using one of the methods when we started the discussion on that. People turn qualitative or text data and quantitative numbers.
Yeah.
I've done a bit of that in my research. And one of my recent projects out, we use what's called structured topics modeling.
Okay.
And that's kind of an application of functional modeling on text data.
Okay.
And it has an assumption that any natural language product data would have hidden latent meanings associated with it.
Yeah.
And the words simply reflect those things.
Okay.
And it's a quantitative tool to try and get at those meaning modules.
Really?
But it's
like discourse analysis with quant.
That's right.
Yeah,
So
wow.
it's quantitative, it's using computational tools, but it's not just that. I'm also using my interpretation, my subjectivity, my interest in that particular question might be just that. So I think it's more mixed.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It has a feeling of a mixed research, but when I write about it, it feels very quantitative.
No, that's incredible. I mean, I guess I'm a product of my own environment. So you're more, I think you're probably more progressive with quant researchers than the School of Psychology at Sydney, which is very perception oriented. You know, we are the traditional home of realism, and so all of my thinking has been, come from that. You know, how do I become a progressive polar researcher in the home of perception and realism? So if I'm learning when you say that, that's fantastic. So, I mean, all knowledge production is local, right? So, so here I am. So that's really interesting to me. I find it fascinating. But yeah, that's not always my experience, you know, in my own local environment.
I do agree with you though, that it comes down to like knowledge of philosophy and philosophy of science in particular. I think a lot of that kind of posturing comes from people's lack of like kind of having a well thought out position on those sorts of things themselves is defensive.
Yeah. It's very interesting to me though that you can bring all of those forces to bear on statistical analysis. I find that fascinating.
And some of the textual database that we've been playing around with recently are huge volumes that couldn't possibly be looked at by a single person, but can be looked at in a very sophisticated way with computers. And you can start getting at some issues of you can get a balance between generalizability and some of the depth that you get from the
That's so
textual stuff.
It reminds me of this thing I was reading about metamodernism. Metamodernism, like we don't have to have modernism or postmodernism, but metamodernism, where we can look at the relationship between the two, and that metamodernism transcends the politics and says, actually, no, we can oscillate between them and see how they interact and see what hybridization is possible. So that's quite interesting.
One of the things that we're working on with a colleague at the moment is a real mixed method one that's quite a strange one, where we use computers to go through thousands of documents to select texts for qualitative analysis.
Whoa, okay, that's good. That's like your recruitment, your method to get the text. Oh, okay, that's really good. Okay, well, that's good. I'm learning too. So it's an exchange. Good. Okay, so narrative inquiry. Where are we next? So you mentioned. How you can access the meaning behind text, in the work that you're doing. So maybe I'll talk about discourse analysis next, because that's similar. Discourse analysis, and I actually find it the hardest qual method to do, and I usually find it so hard that I draw on my colleagues if I need it, which is really using theory to interpret text. So, and I read a text, like we did an experiment with 5 academics where we tried to learn discourse analysis, and most of them were quite experienced, I wasn't, and everybody came from different points of view, and we picked one book, and then we each had our kind of living theory, in other words our own values, but informed by different philosophers, and but our living theory, and we had a whole year of analysing this text. And I read the text, I thought, that's a great novel, I really enjoyed that, and then I put it down, and then they come at it like with, what? They're reading like one paragraph, reading a million things into like one paragraph, like they go, oh, I can see, recursive theory of this and that, and in 3 words. It's like, it's incredible skill to theorize about narrative text and to be able to read philosophy into them, to bring them alive, And then what I realized in this group, and we call this group the N=6 project, which, there's only 6 of us. It's not, we've got one participant, the book, and 6 academics, so it's quite heavy. And we gradually learned that how a text can be interpreted in such a multiplicity of ways for discourse analysis that the notion that there's only one reading becomes ridiculous. There is polyphonic interpretation of text. So that can be really useful. There's a great discourse analysis on the DSM, like reading into Foucauldian discourse analysis of the DSM. Like they're reading some selected pages of the DSM and looking at what's really being said. What's really being said about the power relationship between the writer and the person who's being defined by the diagnosis, and to tease it apart to see, what's really going on in here. What's this? What are the power relationships that we're really going on? And I find that very useful, very interesting. Given as psychologists, we can abuse our power. We can. There's a danger that we colonize our clients through our method of nosology and all that. So I find that's one example. But this critical discourse analysis is always. You're always going to criticism. They're always trying to tear things apart, and deconstruct them, and reveal the power dynamics. They're really serious people. They're about shredding things, dismantling them, and leaving it on the ground in a mess. And then not picking it up and doing anything new. that's the big criticism, right, of critical discourse analysis, especially Foucauldian critical discourse analysis, that it's destructive, but it doesn't rebuild, you know, and I think, I mean, it's perfectly fine to do that if you're going to suggest an alternative, you know. So, yeah, so you destroyed the DSM. So what are we going to do next? And, you know, and in England, the BPS has become quite Foucauldian in the British Psychological Society. It's now basically abandoning the DSM. It's produced a new model called the power threat meaning framework, and they are trying to produce something new. I mean, obviously, it's very naive at this point, but you know, this kind of approach is becoming strong in England, but no, not really anywhere else. Critical psychology. So critical psychology and discourse analysis. And there you go, feminist, Foucauldian, critical discourse. You know that Monty Python, Life of Brian, where there's do you know that movie? Have you seen that movie where the rebels are arguing over the name of their group? No? Maybe I'm showing my age. Yeah. A lot of politics in that realm. Okay, so next is participatory action research. Has anybody heard of that? Any familiarity with that? So this is really different, and if you're going to talk about research that does something practical, this is the one. Because what it's saying is, let's join together. Let's have a community, a project, and say, we have a problem. Can you help us fix it? And let's do some work with them to help them fix it, and through research. So my friend Michael, for example, he works. He's Canadian. He works for the Inuit. He's a critical suicidologist. So you can see he does suicide from a critical point of view. His research is to go and live with the Inuit for 6 months, to say to them, let me interview you and find out, and all the young people and all the mothers and the fathers and the elders, and find out their ideas about why suicide is so high, and let me code and analyze that, bring it back to you in a summary and say, this is what people think. And then these are the ideas, which ones we want to try, and then we try them, and then we interview the people we tried it with, and then we bring it back, and we go in this iterative cycle until we get something that works, and then we keep going until we got suicide rate, you know, over a long period. So there's interviews, and there's analysis, and there's feedback, but it's participatory. It's their ideas given back to them in a cycle until it's empowering. You know, I think it's a community-based participatory action research is used, you know, in communities really quite well. And he's a really impressive man. Obviously, it's not something that a student can do, like, you know, very easily, and you know, and the funding required is high. But there is focused participatory research, like where I did a project where at Red Bank House, you know, Red Bank House, they were trialing a supervision method for clinicians where they explored their family of origin, if they were stuck with clients, and they compared their genogram with the family genogram to see if that was the reason why they were stuck, transference and kind of, you know, all the psychodynamic stuff. And we used participatory action methods to develop it. And, you know, in other words, we've got feedback and then cycles of feedback, so the team developed the model for them, for their own unit. And it was quite cool, and it was possible to do. Obviously, it wasn't living with the Indians, so going to Red Bank to meet people like this. But that's a really good. It's good for youth-based work, and you know, youth-based participatory action is very strong. Like the LGBT work is extremely on fire at the moment. And, you know, that kind of research very, very powerful in terms of helping young people redesign the mental health and medical system to be more inclusive. You know, empowering young people to take charge. That kind of activist research is really good. I'm doing pretty well. I only got one more. So now we fall right off the cliff in post-qualitative inquiry, the avant-garde of qualitative research. Norman Denzin is American, he's the guru. His famous quote, "Data is dead." And methods are dead, even. Like, so in other words, that hard to even explain it. Oh, I forgot another method. Hang on, I've got to go back. Just let me go back. Ethnography. I can't not talk about ethnographic research because that's very important. So, ethnographic research is the study of culture. Margaret Mead, and that's the old school ethnography. But ethnographic research is very strong, very established. So you have kind of ethnographic research where you sit and observe as a participant. So we have a student at the moment. We're doing an open dialogue project in Sydney and New South Wales. It's a method of network therapy for psychosis we talked about some time. We have a student doing ethnographic research where she sits in and observes our experiments in open dialogue and our attempts to roll it out in Sydney. And she observes the interactions and the problems and writes field notes and then interprets those field notes, plus interviewing people. It's an observational method. You can be a participant and also observe yourself and others. It's anthropology, essentially, right? Then you have auto-ethnography. I love auto-ethnography, but it can be easily parodied. In other words, studying yourself in culture to understand like what a particular cultural environment. I've done auto-ethnography of grief myself. I lost my parents both at the same time. I did an auto-ethnography of that. I wrote a paper about it, and it was very good for me, of course, but it was also very interesting to talk about grief from the first person, not just always from the third person. And I think, and it went really well to the publication, although now my heart's on my sleeve all around everywhere, but never mind. But, that can be useful, at times. Collective auto-ethnography is really great, where you get 20 or 30 people experiencing the same thing to write an auto-ethnography, and then you write it as a group. So I run a group called Decolonizing Clinical Psychology, although we've just been told that name stinks by our Indigenous representatives, so they don't like that name, so we're thinking of a new one. A lot of us are, white fellas trying to understand how we can respond, how we can adapt and change clinical psychology to be more responsive to a wider range of people. And we're all interrogating ourselves, and perhaps in not the best way always. But we're doing a collective auto-ethnography of that, to say, what do psychologists trained traditionally have to do to go on this journey to think about the person? And that's a useful paper, because then people can read it and go, oh, okay, here's a possible direction to go in. So that's it. And then you've got posthumanism and the big philosophers are Deleuze and Guattari. It's so hard to explain. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm not going to do too much on that, but it is very fascinating. It's avant-garde. I went to one presentation, a PhD presentation in America, and it was like an avant-garde black and white film. That was the PhD. That was it. I was like, and it was one guy stubbing out a cigarette butt for like half an hour. I was like.
Actually, on this PhD.
Yeah, so, it's really avant-garde, but, it does exist within the realm of the ball. So that's qualitative research. What's that? Yeah, you can do it. They can do it on the bus on their phone. Okay, so thank you. That's finished, and we can have questions and conversations. What I'm most interested in is your responses. Like, some of the responses are really interesting to me, where you go, hang on, I like that. I want to hear more of that. If you agree, but also if you disagree, or if you think, you've got that bit wrong, I quite like to hear that. I like to learn, and I like it to be a collaborative process. And the other question I want you to answer is, what are you interested in learning more about?
Yeah, well, just on that point, first of all, did you pass your audition?
Yes.
We'll have you back.
Oh, thanks.
And I think what might be a good idea is perhaps Alicia and I, we can get together with some of the other people here and decide amongst ourselves what are the sorts of things we do here in Pippi, as far as Qual goes, and then we can focus on what methodologies, and then we'll tell you that this is what we want.
Later on, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I'll talk to everyone.
No, let's throw it out on the paper.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so any of those questions? Yeah, go on.
I'm just curious, how is autoethnography different from introspection and philosophical? What are the key elements of the method that a person has to keep in mind as they are trying to understand their own meaning and own career?
Yeah, I mean, I did mine.
Can you repeat the question?
How is autoethnography different from, introspective research, or maybe even autobiography, or stream of consciousness writing, or all the other types of things? There's more systematic research methodology. You have to outline the method much more, operationalize it much more. You're taking notes at regular intervals. You're not just writing it straight up. As a creative piece. Where, it's not poetry. So there is a method, and there is an analysis of the data as well. And you can use different theories and different types of analysis. So it does fit within. I once met with someone who's doing an autoethnography, doing a PhD, and I had to walk away after 10 minutes. So that's just crazy.
It's the culture element too, right? That's the anchor in autoethnography, is the culture element.
It is, yeah. And all of us are barometers of our culture if we listen in, if we listen closely. And one way of listening is to introspect, and think what's happening culturally. You ask yourself cultural questions, about, and then other people can. That kind of research doesn't answer questions. It's very important. It asks questions. And a lot of qualitative research asks questions. It raises and promotes conversation, not answers them. We're less interested, you could argue, in answering. We're more interested in opening things up. And that's also a different paradigm, that it's about asking the question to get people thinking rather than answering the definitive things. You can do that with qualitative research too.
I've got a question. This applies, I guess, to both quant and qual. The example I'm going to give is in the Aboriginal space. And we talk about, us as humans, we step into the role as researcher. Research participants are also humans who step into the role as participants. Yeah. And when they do step into that role, often, they don't talk about their lived experience, they'll talk about their reported experience, which can be very different.
In my terminology, it becomes performance. It becomes a performance.
Oh, very much so.
Yes.
And if I give you a very simple example, I'll be in a meeting with Indigenous people, Indigenous advisors, and I hear all the culture crap. They're connected to Mother Earth and all that sort of BS, which I'm drowning in. We step outside of the pub or whatever, it's a completely different person. I think, where did all the culture go? So
how do you access that?
Exactly. How do you access the real?
That's a very hard question. How long do you have to get to know someone before? How long do you have? To get to know someone as part of research.
Sometimes I feel like we could just have a hidden tape recorder. Let's have a game of golf.
One thing is just to breach ethics and do that. But I think the other thing is that some methods require a long period of time. It's like those documentaries where you're like, there's a camera, what are you saying that for? Like when you see these documentaries, it's the same with quality. You need a long period of time. Trust has to be developed.
And I was going to say, and the relationship you have would assist that, or would in fact, if you don't have a relationship, you never get to that point. You never get to that point of, I guess, some truth in what you're hearing.
Yeah, and that's why the idea of being a participant observer is really interesting. That if it's like being undercover. Sometimes you have to join a community and get to know everybody, and then start the research. And that's obviously longitudinal and takes a lot of time, but it may be required to access certain types of knowledge. Yeah.
Tell me about some of the ethical issues you run into in trying to do qualitative research, particularly when you're doing a more grounded theory type of approach, where you're doing an approach where you don't have research questions to go into as a starting point.
Well, grounded theory is a great case in point because the questions change after each interview. You know, you interview, you develop a model, you go, oh, there's missing bits, I'm going to ask new questions, and then ethics want to know every single question. And you can't, you put in 20 amendments to 20 subjects, you don't. And my view is, well, join the ethics committee, which is what I did. That helps. But, or, you know, actually go and make, go and, but go and, you have to educate the ethics committee. You really do, because they don't understand qualitative research sometimes, and you have to say, you know, these are the types of themes we're going to follow, and it's going to change. And I think they do come along with grounded theory. Other ethical problems, I mean, we're doing a study at the moment of Alcoholics Anonymous groups. You know, we're looking at the process research, what happens between people that helps in terms of abstinence, things like that. And the ethics committee they were just brutal. Like in terms of, they thought that you know, because we wanted to have half a group where people. Well, you know, we wanted some members would consent and some members wouldn't, you know, into the research. But they just infantilized Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, to the point of where they thought they were so vulnerable that, you know, they couldn't cope with having research being done. And we had to kind of educate them to say, you know, actually these people are quite powerful. You know, they're you know, they're not as childlike as you think, you know, when you're asking these tough stories.
Especially when you're working with kids. I mean, I had a study where a student was doing participant observation, and the playground ethics committee said you can only look at people that had signed the ethics stuff. And
ethics, you know, there's a difficulty when if it gets in the way of research versus as real ethical concerns, you know, and it's balanced even with every type of research is really hard. My solution has been to go to the ethics committee and talk to them and try and help them understand the methods and things like that. Any particular methods that resonate, that you think, oh, you know, my area of research, that will be interesting? Or
Participatory action research, I think, would be really cool.
Right, okay. What kind of work do you do?
Well, we do stuff with adolescents, and we have something like that with ARC now, looking at, you know, empowering adolescents in the schools to become the force of change.
Oh, right.
So that's exactly the kind of design.
Yeah, there's quite a tradition around that, so that's great. And you know, the idea that research is intervention is very, it's quite novel, isn't it?
I mean, it's like if you make the kids the researchers in a sense, but they're the leaders and the researchers, but they're very active doing that is an intervention on themselves.
Yeah, it's really great. It's great on so many levels. Empowerment, it's also good professionally for them. You know, like there's many reasons why teaching them to do research is really great.
They become the experts in their own experience.
Yeah, it's really great.
Yeah, we've recently started trying to do some more participatory action research in some of our Indigenous studies. And recently we trained up some facilitators, and they were working with people in their own network, and they ended up telling us to leave, to leave the room and to not be involved at all. So
right.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
That's good. Well, I mean, so they don't want to run it themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I guess that was your aim, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
You don't know what they did once you.
As long as they were ready.
I really got time to go and get the coffee.
That's perfect.
Paul, one of the constraints on us with research here is tight timelines where we've got to get things done.
Yeah.
We've got so much work to do, so that's sort of a consideration of, okay, what is the best method given that we've only got X amount of.
Yeah, I mean, all my students are masters in LPH. The masters want within 2 years, and usually get one study done around these methods. I mean, yeah, they're pretty much used all of them. And participatory action is the most challenging one, time-wise. It can be if you've got these cycles, you know.
Cost-wise, too.
Pardon?
Cost-wise, too.
Cost-wise, yeah. But I mean, the numbers are smaller. Don't forget, you're doing a narrative inquiry project. You're doing 15 people, so I mean. It's the analysis that's tough, you know, like, so, you know, it's not too bad. I mean, if you really, I mean, I have a project with STARTS, you know, refugee rehab service in Fairfield, And I had to abandon it because the idea of going in with a tape recorder and interviewing people as a foreigner, you know, as a white Australian, and then my students were, is so frightening because they just think, you know, they don't trust because, you know, for obvious reasons, because of where they come from. The amount of time it would take to develop trust is disallowed.
And it threatens the clinicians.
In what sense?
I think people become, in organisations such as STARTS, people become quite concerned about how their performance is.
And organisations, especially traumatised organisations, can become closed systems. I mean, there's a lot of vicarious trauma, and it becomes a closed system, and so to enter it is very hard.
I work in one of them.
Right, yeah, I used to work for DOCS, so there's the ultimate traumagenic organisation, you know. So, but, you know, I mean, I admire them enormously, those people, but it is very hard to do research with some people, you know.
Well, it flows on a little bit from the question Anthony was asking, which is we're focused on high impact research here.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we can learn from your experience about what qualitative methods or approaches within the spectrum, if you like, might be best serving.
So you mean high impact? You mean small I or big I? I assume you mean big I.
High impact journals.
Yeah.
Citations, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've abandoned all that. my role has been my role has been to get behind new journals, you know, journals that are respectful and journals that allow difference, and I found that to be a good niche because that looks good in my role to get behind new, innovative, progressive journals and support them, you know, so they can get up to an impact factor of 1.5.
So what would you sort of, if you had to put a different hat on?
No, I mean, I have had things published in oncology and in pain and in you know, in very high impact journals. You're probably going to stray. You're probably going to stop at ground theory. You're probably going to do mixed methods. You know, you're probably going to be. You call it hypothesis generation. You know, you'd have all the, you know, rather than, you know, you'd have all these. You wouldn't stray from post-positivism. You know, from objectivity too much, you know, it's problematic. It's problematic. I mean, my view is to resist all that. I know maybe you don't have the luxury, but my view is to say, you know, that's just the marginalisation of other forms of knowledge, and I'm not tolerating. I mean, you know, I'm not tolerating it. I just think that system crushes, you know, other forms of meaning making, which should be resisted. And, you know, we should fight against it. That's my view. So, and maybe you don't have the luxury, but I mean, maybe, you know, I would argue for cultural change on that one personally. So, well, but in the end, you know, you know, with practice, you've got to be true to your aims, you know, and not be dictated to by neoliberalism.
It gets a lot easier. It does get easier if your goal is to help improve people's lives.
Yeah.
You have something like, how much did you improve their reading level, or, you know, did you keep them in school, or...
Yeah, I think that the impact should be a small I, and it should be about doing good, you know, and if we're doing good, you know, fuck that. So, that's fun. And that's on film.
We'll wrap that up.
Yeah, thanks. Is that how I finish?
Show our appreciation. We'll be seeing Paul again.
Good. Get back to me.
Are you going to hang around for a little while?
Yeah.